In this section, we will discuss the Indiana Academic Standards, where you will complete a hands-on activity and submit a Google form about the standards. We will talk about No Child Left Behind briefly, and then you will explore an already created web quest. So let's begin. For a hands-on activity for the academic standards, you will visit the Indiana State Standards website, which is linked in the PowerPoint, and on the W200 website. You will find a standard that is relevant to your future teaching, preferably with resources on your own, and then you will submit you will answer the questions on the Google form. So what I would like you to do right now is to select the Indiana State Standards website, and it will open up in your browser. Now, this is the second site that we looked at last week. The first site was through Learning Connection, which is still being developed, so we're going to use the second link. For the standard search, you can search standards by keywords, by subjects, and there are more subjects that are not listed here. These are the 4 main core subjects, and then we have other subjects. And then we have grades K through 8 in the grade list, and then other grades. Depending on the subject you pick, it will tailor to the subjects in the drop-down menu. For instance, I would select social studies, and if I wanted to teach high school, I would select more. And notice that the more menu is significantly smaller and lists only things that fall under social studies. I'm going to stay on social studies, and I'm going to say I want to teach 7th grade. And we'll search for standards for 7th grade social studies. And we have our 7th grade social studies standards: history, civics and government, geography, and economics. Now, since I studied history, I'm going to select the history standard, and it gives me the substandard. So, grade 7, standard 1, substandard 1 is on early civilizations, states, and empires. I'm going to scroll and look through for something that interests me. Here we go. Standard 7, 111, major civilizations, states, and empires, 300 to 1650. Explain how Japan became increasingly independent of early Chinese influences, developing its own political, religious, social, and artistic traditions. I studied Japan when I was in college, so I'm going to select the resources. And there are 3 resources here: the History of Asia, which is a classroom assessment, option B. There is also an assessment for option A. And then there is the Samurai X Games Japanese Heritage. At this moment, what I would like you to do is to pause the video, go to the W200 webpage, and if you're all the way on the top, here's your class prep that you submitted. We will scroll down to the Google form right here, and you'll fill in this Google form. Press submit when you are done, and then come back and you can watch the rest of the video. Okay, so you should have submitted your your hands-on activity for the state standards. If you did have a problem, feel free to send me an email and we can work on it together. There's also the job aid on the W200 website. So we're going to talk about digital natives again. Remember, I said that digital natives are students who have never known anything different. They've always had technology surrounding them. They've always used it. It's become intuitive for them to use. So we have to think about how it went from students with just books, learning from books, to learning on a cell phone, learning on a tablet, learning from the computer, learning through the internet. The old way versus the new way. And when we have to think about it, we have to think about how standards and accountability fall into this whole idea. So we've talked about the students, the digital natives, what they want to learn, how they want to learn. But you as the teacher, you're going to be in the middle of all this, because we have administrators, authorities, school, corporations that have expectations for you to teach these digital natives, to teach these students. So you're kind of caught in the middle. So let's talk about the other side, the administrators, the authorities. To do that, we're going to do it in the context of No Child Left Behind, which is legislation that was passed a few years ago and is the rule of the land for schools. Okay? The key elements of No Child Left Behind: states must develop their own accountability systems. Typically, this is standardized tests, the I-STEPS, the New York State Regents exams, etc. Schools have to make adequately yearly progress, AYP, in standardized test scores. They have to continuously get better. Those that do not are put on a published list of failing schools, and parents can transfer their students to another school. This is something that was happening in the Indianapolis Public Schools, IPS, where schools that were placed on the failing list, students were starting to transfer out to other IPS schools. Less money was going to that school, which would lead into a perpetual failure cycle, which could lead to a perpetual failure cycle. For teachers, all teachers have to be considered highly qualified, and this was by 2005. In New York, that meant you had to have a master's degree to teach. And schools have to use a scientifically based practice and method, scientifically based practices and methods of teaching and assessing students. The main reasons for having academic standards: one, it's to make sure students are learning what they're supposed to learn at the particular level. So we looked at Social Studies Standard 7, Grade 7, Standard 1, History, Substandard 11, Japan. We have to make sure that the standards say that this is what the students have to learn. They have to learn these particular items for Japanese history in the context of the world. And standards also are meant to clearly measure our student outcomes. That's why we have a standardized test, where every student takes the exact same test, and then we can score them based on the test. So we can see where they fall, how much they've understood compared to the rest of the class. The standards-based education reform, while setting high standards, setting high standards and establishing measurable goals will improve students' outcomes. It's been said, and it's what each state decides students will learn, each school must prove that the students are learning it. How do they prove it? They prove it through standardized tests and the scores. Report the scores to the central office, and they can see how the students are doing as a group, and individually how they measure up against each other student. Thus, administrators, parents, and students have expectations about technology use in the classroom. As a teacher, you are expected to teach with technology to meet your students' needs, and your students' needs to meet the state standards. Your students have to meet the standards. If they don't meet the state standards, if they don't get really good test scores, if they don't pass the test, that reflects poorly on you as an educator. And remember what we talked about last week, where we're moving away from the tenure model of education to a more accountability model. If you consistently have lower test scores, the chances of you losing your job are a little bit higher. It's important for you to know how to integrate technology in your classroom based on the standards. And that's why we're here. That's what W200 is about, to make good decisions about implementing technology in the classroom to meet these standards. Because if you're using technology for technology's sake, chances are it's not going to work. You have to know why you're using the technology to meet a certain goal, to meet the certain standard. But what about individualized learning and customized learning? How can you as a teacher meet both the standards and your student needs? Your students are not going to be all the same. Okay? They're not like little blocks that are put on a table, and they're going to learn the exact same way and do everything the same way when you stack them up. That's not how students are. Students are all different. As a teacher, you do have to customize learning based on the students at times and allow them to explore if they're ahead or catch up if they're behind. How can we do this? One effective way are web quests. So what's a web quest? A web quest is an inquiry-oriented lesson. Okay? I'd like you to pause this screencast, go to the W200 webpage, I'll show you where it is, and watch this video about a web quest in plain English. It's about 2 minutes long, and it will explain to you in words much easier than I could what a web quest is. So go ahead, pause the screencast, and watch the web quest in plain English. Okay, now that you have watched the web quest in plain English, you're an expert on web quest, right? Just kidding. In short, a web quest is an inquiry-oriented lesson for individual learning in which most or all of our information, of all the information that learners work, comes from the web. Okay? As teachers, we're not giving them the information, they're finding it on the website that's provided. Okay? Teachers give a task to students to work on, individually or as a group, and the teacher provides information and appropriate resources. Now, appropriate resources is bolded because it depends on the context of the class. It depends on who your learners are, the age group, the content that you're teaching. And as a teacher, you have to provide these appropriate resources information to accomplish the task you've given them. A web quest is composed of 5 main points: the introduction, which is where you describe the goals, the academic standards, as well as the subject target audience, and it tries to capture the student's interest. A task, where you describe what the end result of the learner's activity will be. By the end of this web quest, you will create a video. Process, where you walk the learners through the appropriate steps to accomplish the task. This is where you provide your appropriate resources that enhances the learning experience. For the evaluation page, you let them self-assess their final products and let them know how you are going to assess their final products. And then a conclusion, where you summarize what they have accomplished and give credits and further resources for them to explore in greater detail. Why web quests? Web quests because students learn at their own pace, because they're different, and they can learn on their own. Some students won't have an interest in certain aspects. One student will not be interested in warfare of Japanese history, and they're more interested in culture and the dance. And as a teacher, you're going to provide them content to try and get them a broad view, depending on the task. They're all going to learn the same content in the end, and students learn at their own pace and on their own. So even if they do have different interests, they still have to follow the resources that you've given them. So if they don't have the interest in warfare or pottery or dance or something, they're still going to learn the overall concept within the resources you give them. As a teacher, it allows you to be free from being a presenter. You don't have to stand in front of the class. You don't have to pontificate and give them knowledge. It allows you to give individualized assistance. Walk around the room if they're doing it in class, or provide support outside of class through email or however you contact with them, or in class after they've done the activity. You can give assistance to those in need. It frees you up from being in front of the classroom, and it gives the students the freedom to explore on their own. So how do we make a web quest? Again, we have the TPAC model. I know I said we weren't going to look at it all that often. In week 1 we looked at it, week 2 we've looked at it. But I want to show you how this web quest meets that center dot that we're looking for of TPAC, of the Technological Pedagogical Content Knowledge Model. Okay, so we have the context of our classroom, the content the subject, the students, all within this context. Web quests provide us easy ways to meet all 3 parts of this model. Content knowledge, well, that's the knowledge that they're going to gain through the web quest. So in my example, the Japanese history they're going to be learning. For technology tools, we will have templates. You can find templates at Quest Garden, at Zunal. Website building tools, Google Sites, Weebly, Yola, or others, maybe Google Docs, maybe Google Presentations, Prezi, etc. And pedagogical knowledge, you devise a task for the students. So how we teach, we're teaching them through a task which they meet the learning goal, provide appropriate guidelines and resources, and provide self-assessment tools for the students so they can measure their product versus how you're going to be assessing them, and they can assess it on their own so they can see how high quality their product is. So in the next section, we're going to be going through the web quest.